May 28, 1945. The interrogation room in Mondeur, Luxembourg, felt suffocatingly small. General Oberst Alfred Jodl sat rigid in his chair, watching an American intelligence officer across the table. His pencil lay motionless in front of him. The officer began speaking, and with each word, Jodl's face drained of color. The man was telling him something impossible. The first United States Army group, FUSAG, the entire threat that had consumed German military planning for months. It had never actually existed. The American's slight nod confirmed what Jodl couldn't comprehend. The psychological world the German general inhabited was collapsing around him. For 2 years, Germany's highest commanders had positioned hundreds of thousands of troops to counter threats that never materialized. Entire divisions had been moved to defend against phantom enemies. Defensive lines stretched for hundreds of miles to protect against forces that consisted of nothing but rubber and canvas and strategic genius. The reality emerging in that interrogation room was staggering. Fewer than 3,000 Allied specialists had effectively neutralized nearly 500,000 German soldiers without ever pulling a trigger. Not a single shot fired, just information, just deception. What made this truth even more devastating was how it had been accomplished. They hadn't been beaten by superior numbers or firepower. They had been conquered by the most elaborate military deception in human history. Inflatable tanks weighing just 93 pounds, masquerading as 32-ton Shermans. Hollywood artists creating entire fictional divisions. Double agents so deeply trusted by German intelligence that Hitler himself had decorated them with the Iron Cross for warning about invasions that would never happen. The story emerging through post-war interrogations, declassified documents, and veteran testimonies revealed something far more crushing than any conventional military defeat. The German High Command had spent the crucial months of 1944 defending against illusions. These illusions had foundations laid on December 6, 1943, when the Allied Combined Chiefs of Staff approved Operation Bodyguard. This was the comprehensive deception campaign designed to mislead German forces about when and where Northwest Europe would be invaded. The scope was genuinely unprecedented. Multiple fictional military formations appeared across Britain. Fake invasion preparations stretched from Norway to the Mediterranean. The largest double-agent operation ever attempted was coordinated with surgical precision. At the center of everything stood the London Controlling Section, established back in 1942 under Colonel John Bevan. His office operated from beneath Whitehall, a small team working in secrecy that would orchestrate the most complex web of lies in military history. These intelligence officers conducted a symphony of deception so intricate that decades later, historians still struggle to separate truth from fiction. Their weapon wasn't conventional at all. It was information itself, carefully crafted, meticulously distributed, devastating in its psychological impact. The challenge they faced was mathematically stark. In January 1944, German forces in Western Europe consisted of 58 divisions, roughly 850,000 combat troops. The Allies faced an urgent necessity. These forces had to be spread thin across the 3,000-mile Atlantic Wall rather than concentrated where the real invasion would strike. Every German division kept away from Normandy on D-Day would save thousands of Allied soldiers. Every successful deception would preserve lives. The true genius of Operation Bodyguard didn't lie in grand strategic vision. It lay in psychological sophistication. British intelligence had invested 3 years studying German military doctrine, studying command structures, and most critically, studying Adolf Hitler's own psychology. They understood his obsession with the Pas-de-Calais region. They knew his absolute conviction that any rational enemy would choose the shortest crossing point across the Channel. They recognized his dangerous tendency to see patterns that confirmed his preconceptions, his fatal trust in intelligence that supported his strategic assumptions. This psychological profile shaped every single aspect of the deception. As historian Thaddeus Holt would later write, Operation Bodyguard represented something unprecedented. It was the first time in military history that an entire campaign was constructed not around defeating the enemy's forces, but around defeating the enemy's mind. On January 20, 1944, At Camp Forest, Tennessee, something began to take shape that the military had never before attempted. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops assembled for training unlike anything previously undertaken. This unit would become known as the Ghost Army. These weren't ordinary soldiers drafted for combat. They were a carefully selected group of artists, engineers, and creative professionals recruited from America's finest art schools and advertising agencies. 603rd Camouflage Engineers formed the visual deception component, with personnel drawn from Pratt Institute, Cooper Union, and the Philadelphia Museum School of Industrial Art. Among them was a 22-year-old named Bill Blass, who would later revolutionize fashion design. There was Ellsworth Kelly, who would pioneer minimalist art. These men brought skills the military had never considered essential to warfare, the ability to create massive, convincing illusions. At the U.S. Rubber Company's plant in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, a revolutionary manufacturing process hummed along day and night. Workers, many of them teenage girls earning 49 cents per hour, assembled pneumatic tanks and trucks and artillery pieces from rubberized canvas and neoprene. Each inflatable Sherman tank, when deflated, weighed just 93 pounds. Inflate it with gasoline-powered compressors, and it could be operational in 20 minutes. From 400 yards away, the typical range for German aerial reconnaissance, these rubber constructs looked absolutely identical to genuine armored vehicles. The technical details were remarkable in their precision. The inflatable equipment featured authentic markings and unit insignia. Simulated wear patterns made them look battle-tested. The Ghost Army developed techniques for creating realistic track marks using bulldozers equipped with special attachments. They learned to position vehicles at slightly irregular angles, mimicking the natural disorder of real military camps. Most ingeniously, they deliberately included imperfect camouflage, allowing enemy reconnaissance to discover positions that seemed carelessly hidden. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simonson commanded the 603rd Engineers, driving his men toward theatrical extremes in their training. Soldiers learned to construct entire military installations overnight, complete with motor pools and supply depots and command posts. They studied the daily rhythms of actual military units, when laundry would be hung, when vehicles would move for maintenance, when smoke would rise from field kitchens. Every detail mattered. While visual deception captured enemy eyes, the 31st 32nd Signal Service Company attacked with unprecedented sonic warfare. They worked alongside Bell Telephone Laboratories in Murray Hill, New Jersey, developing technology that seemed like science fiction. The unit's primary weapons were 500-pound speakers mounted on modified M10 tank destroyers, capable of projecting sound across 15 miles. These weren't simple loudspeakers. They were sophisticated acoustic projection systems that could simulate entire armored divisions on the move through any terrain. Bell Labs engineers created detailed atmospheric effect tables. They calculated how temperature, humidity, wind speed, and terrain affected sound propagation. A recording of tanks moving through mud at 40 degrees Fahrenheit required different amplification settings than the same recording played at 70 degrees. The sound effects library they assembled was extraordinary in its detail and precision. Engineers at Fort Knox drove tanks at various speeds over different surfaces: concrete, gravel, mud, grass, recording each with multiple microphone placements. They captured the distinctive sounds of different tank models: the high-pitched whine of Stuart light tanks, the deeper rumble of Shermans, the characteristic squeal of tank tracks in need of maintenance. Bridge construction was recorded in segments: pile drivers, welding torches, officers shouting commands, the splash of pontoons hitting water. Staff Sergeant John Shilstone, a sound engineer before the war, developed mixing techniques that created three-dimensional soundscapes. Using multiple speakers positioned at different distances, they could simulate the approach of an armored column, complete with the Doppler effect, as vehicles passed hypothetical listening posts. German acoustic reconnaissance units, trained to identify Allied equipment by sound signatures, heard massive armored formations that existed only as carefully orchestrated recordings. The psychological sophistication extended into the smallest details. They recorded soldiers complaining about food, sergeants threatening punishment for minor infractions. vehicles that wouldn't start on cold mornings. These ambient sounds mixed with primary effects created an audio portrait so convincing that local French civilians would later swear they had seen the tanks they had only heard. Perhaps no element required more technical precision than radio simulation conducted by the signal company Special. Radio operators in military units developed distinctive transmission patterns, their fist as unique as fingerprints. German signal intelligence, among the world's most sophisticated, catalogued these patterns to track unit movements. The Ghost Army had to replicate not just message traffic, but the individual quirks of hundreds of radio operators. Using SCR 399 radio sets, the Ghost Army's 296 signal specialists maintained the electronic signature of entire divisions. They employed IBM machines programmed to generate random 5-letter code groups that mimicked genuine encrypted traffic. Operators spent weeks studying recordings of specific radio men from real units, learning to duplicate their unique transmission rhythms and patterns. Radio operator Lester Friedman became expert at replicating the fist of men he'd never met. The radio deception operated on strict schedules that matched observed Allied patterns. Morning reports at 600, supply requests at 1,000, evening situation reports at 1,800. They simulated radio discipline failures, operators who forgot to encode routine messages, brief transmissions in clear language during emergencies. They created characteristic increases in traffic before imaginary major operations. German intercept stations, monitoring from powerful facilities in France and Belgium, faithfully logged every transmission, building detailed pictures of Allied formations that didn't exist. While the Ghost Army prepared its tools of deception, Operation Fortitude took shape across Britain. The operations split into two major components. Fortitude North suggested an invasion of Norway. Fortitude South indicated an assault on the Pas-de-Calais. Each required its own elaborate infrastructure of deception. Colonel David Strangeways, a brilliant intelligence officer who had served with Montgomery in North Africa, received responsibility for tactical deception under 21st Army Group. On February 23, 1944, Strangeways completely rewrote the Fortitude South plan. He recognized that physical deception alone couldn't succeed. Instead, he created a framework that relied primarily on double agents and radio traffic, with visual deception serving as confirmation rather than primary evidence. The centerpiece was the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, commanded by General George S. Patton, a choice calculated for maximum German attention. Patton, whom the Germans considered America's finest combat commander, had been conspicuously absent from public view since the slapping incidents in Sicily. German intelligence desperately sought his location, convinced that wherever Patton appeared, the main Allied effort would follow. The notional order of battle for FUSAG was magnificent in its detail. It comprised two armies, the 1st Canadian Army, real but assigned elsewhere, and the 3rd U.S. Army, real but not yet operational. Under these were 11 divisions, some real but stationed elsewhere, others completely fictional. The imaginary units included the 17th U.S. Infantry Division, the 11th U.S. Armored Division, and the 35th U.S. Airborne Division. Each fictional division had its own detailed history, insignia, and chain of command. Physical infrastructure supported every illusion. In southeast England, concentrated in Kent, Essex, and East Anglia, the Allies constructed what appeared to be massive invasion preparations. At Dover, 255 dummy landing craft, designated Big Bobs and Wet Bobs, floated in the harbour. These sophisticated constructs, built from scaffolding tubes, canvas, and oil drums, required 6 to 7 3-ton trucks to transport the 500-plus parts for each unit. A 20-man crew needed 6 hours to assemble one dummy craft, which weighed 8 tons completed. Light enough that they frequently capsized in strong winds, requiring constant maintenance and replacement. Unknown to German intelligence, by 1944 every single agent they believed they had operating in Britain was actually under British control. The double-cross system, administered by the 20 Committee, XEX in Roman numerals, hence double cross, represented the most complete intelligence victory in espionage history. The system's crown jewel was Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spanish citizen who had approached both British and German intelligence services in 1941, determined to work against Nazi Germany. Initially rejected by the British, Pujol convinced German Abwehr officers in Madrid that he could establish a spy network in Britain. Creating from Lisbon, with a tourist guidebook, a railway timetable, and pure imagination, Pujol created fictional agents and sent reports to Germany so convincing that the British became alarmed at this unknown agent's activities. On April 24, 1942, MI5 finally brought Pujol to London via Gibraltar. Under the codename Garbo, known to the Germans as Arabelle, Pujol and his handler Thomas Harris created the most elaborate double-agent operation ever attempted. From a nondescript office on Gower Street, they managed a completely fictional network of 27 sub-agents spread across Britain and beyond. The detail was staggering. Each sub-agent possessed a distinct personality, problems, and motivations. Agent 3 was a Welsh student in Glasgow with communist sympathies. Agent 4 was a Gibraltarian waiter working in the NAFI, the Navy, Army, and Air Force Institutes, who gathered intelligence from careless military conversations. Agent 7 was a Welsh ex-seaman in Swansea who led a network of Welsh nationalists. When Agent 3 was killed during the North African campaign, Pujol needed to eliminate him since his reports from Scotland had become increasingly difficult to maintain. Pujol reported his death to the Germans and even placed an obituary in British newspapers. The Germans' trust in Garbo reached extraordinary levels. In July 1941, they sent him £20,000, equivalent to £1.25 million in 2023 currency, through the Japanese embassy to fund his network. They provided him with secret ink and questionnaires about specific intelligence requirements. Eventually, they awarded him the Iron Cross First Class on July 29, 1944, one of the only civilians to receive this honor. The Allies developed visual deception into an art form that extended far beyond inflatable equipment. Operation Quicksilver, phases 1 through 6, created an entire fictional military infrastructure across southeast England. Lighting sites simulated the illumination patterns of major military installations. At night, dimmed lights suggested blacked-out bases with perfect light discipline. Vehicle headlights moved along predetermined routes, creating impressions of nighttime military traffic. The 406th Combat Engineers, attached to various deception operations, mastered the creation of physical evidence that would convince German reconnaissance. Using bulldozers with special track attachments, they created the distinctive marks of different vehicle types. A Sherman tank left tracks 18.75 inches wide, with distinctive rubber block patterns. They could reproduce these exactly. They learned that tanks turning created characteristic pivot marks in soil, that heavy vehicles compressed earth differently when fully loaded versus empty, that military vehicles leaked specific fluids creating particular stain patterns. Dummy fuel installations appeared along the Dover coast, constructed from camouflaged sewage pipes and boards. From aerial reconnaissance altitude, these installations appeared identical to genuine fuel depots, complete with security fencing, guard posts, and vehicle tracks suggesting regular supply deliveries. The Allies even simulated accidents. A crashed truck here, a collapsed camouflage net there, adding authenticity through imperfection. The Dover Castle tunnels carved into the white cliffs housed the nerve center for radio deception. Banks of transmitters operated 24 hours daily, maintaining the electronic signature of FUSAG. Operators worked in shifts, maintaining consistent patterns that German direction-finding stations could track. They positioned transmitters at locations corresponding to fictional unit headquarters, ensuring that German radio intelligence would place invented divisions exactly where visual reconnaissance confirmed them. The German intelligence apparatus, despite its reputation for efficiency, suffered from fundamental structural flaws that made it vulnerable to Allied deception. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, employed 21,000 officials by 1941. Yet internal rivalries with the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD, the SS intelligence service, created dysfunction that the Allies exploited ruthlessly. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr until February 1944, harbored questionable loyalty to the Nazi regime. His organization had been penetrated not just by Allied agents, but by internal resistance members. Colonel Hans Oster, Canaris's deputy, actively worked against Nazi interests. When Canaris was arrested following the July 20, 1944, assassination attempt on Hitler, the Abwehr was absorbed into the Reich Security Main Office under Walter Schellenberg, creating further chaos in German intelligence gathering. But Fremde Heere West, Foreign Armies West, the Wehrmacht department responsible for evaluating Allied strength, faced its own challenges. Colonel Alexis von Roheny commanded a small staff tasked with an impossible mission. Rohen, a devout Christian and member of the Confessing Church, opposed the Nazi regime while serving in one of its most sensitive positions. His intelligence estimates consistently inflated Allied strength, not from incompetence, but as deliberate sabotage against Hitler's regime. When Rohen received reports about Fusag from multiple sources, Garbo's network, aerial reconnaissance, radio intercepts, he validated and amplified them. His May 1944 estimate placed 89 Allied divisions in Britain when only 45 actually existed. The deception was working. He claimed the US 7th Army Corps was battle-ready in the Folkestone area, though it wouldn't actually become operational until mid-June. His exaggerated assessments, bearing authorization stamps from senior German command, traveled straight up the chain to Hitler himself and the German High Command. German signals intelligence, despite possessing state-of-the-art equipment and exceptionally skilled personnel, fell prey to their own expectations. They picked up authentic transmissions from genuine military units that the Allies had deliberately connected to Fusag through carefully planted radio signals. The British 3rd Infantry Division served as a prime example. It was real, genuinely deployed in Scotland, yet German intelligence concluded it operated under Fusagi command, based entirely on fabricated communications traffic. This combination of authentic and invented information rendered the deception extraordinarily difficult to penetrate. Beyond Garbo's operation, the double-cross network functioned like an intricate machine, with multiple double agents each playing a crucial role in the larger deception scheme. Duško Popov, operating under the codename Tricycle, presented himself as a Serbian socialite with connections to the highest circles of European society, places where military intelligence supposedly leaked freely between champagne toasts. His communications to the Abwehr, actually composed by MI5, wove together genuine but harmless details, outdated intelligence, and strategically planted falsehoods about Allied plans. Roman Chadkowski, a Polish Air Force officer known as Brutus, had previously run an underground network throughout France until his arrest. The Germans believed he had subsequently escaped to Britain, where he transmitted secrets back to Paris through radio transmissions. His legitimate military credentials made his reports about Fusag preparations particularly convincing. On May 31, 1944, just days before the invasion, Brutus radioed that Fusag remained positioned in southeast England, standing by for the order to commence the main attack. Wolf Schmidt, using the codename Tate, earned the title of longest-serving member of the double-cross system. Parachuted into England in September 1940, he was apprehended within hours and flipped to work for the British. For nearly 5 years, continuing until May 2, 1945, Tate supplied intelligence reports to Hamburg. German confidence in him ran so deep that they never discovered how he deliberately misreported V1 and V2 impact zones, causing them to shift their weapon targeting away from London's centre. The orchestration demanded tremendous precision. Each agent's reports had to complement one another without appearing suspiciously uniform. They needed to maintain consistency with the specific information each one supposedly had access to. Garbo might transmit observations about troop movements, while Brutus could provide insight into command decisions. Sequencing proved absolutely vital. Agents had to surface new intelligence in logical progressions that aligned with how German commanders expected espionage networks to operate. As June 1944 drew near, the entire deception machine built toward its climax. Every component required flawless execution to keep German leadership convinced of the Pas-de-Calais invasion threat until American and British soldiers had secured their position in Normandy. The outcome hinged on this deception succeeding completely. Should German tank divisions redeploy to Normandy during those critical first 2 days, the beachhead could be obliterated. On May 29, 1944, Garbo started transmitting an escalating series of urgent reports. His network, particularly an asset positioned in Southampton, signaled massive military concentrations preparing for deployment. Agent 7, located in Swansea, reported long convoys of supplies rolling southward toward the coast. These transmissions, routed through German intelligence channels in Madrid, created an overall picture of imminent operations, deliberately omitting specifics that might trigger hasty German action. The Ghost Army units, freshly arrived in England, began their most decisive performances. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops established false staging zones throughout East Anglia. Inflatable vehicles emerged across fields, positioned under camouflage netting arranged to suggest concealment while remaining visible from above. Radio operators maintained constant transmissions day and night, creating an electronic picture of pre-invasion build-up. Sound trucks broadcast recordings of tank engines rumbling to life during early morning hours. Physical staging intensified the illusion further. Allied bombers dropped aluminum chaff in configurations that resembled bomber streams heading toward Pas-de-Calais. Motor torpedo boats dragged radar reflectors that projected the electronic signature of approaching naval forces. Operation Taxable and Operation Glimmer, executed during the night of June 5th into the 6th, fabricated two separate seaborne invasion forces approaching Dover and Pas-de-Calais. German reconnaissance capabilities, severely limited by Allied air dominance, caught only fragmentary glimpses of these preparations. Luftwaffe pilots, flying at extreme altitude to escape ground defenses, photographed what appeared to be enormous military concentrations in southeast England. Aerial photo analysts at Luftwaffe headquarters tallied hundreds of tanks, thousands of transport vehicles, and numerous assembled landing craft assemblies, virtually all fabricated. At 01:35 hours on June 6, 1944, as Allied paratroopers descended into Normandy, German intelligence headquarters remained convinced the primary invasion force was still gathering in southeast England. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding all German forces in Western Europe, received the first reports of the Normandy landings with doubt. This had to be the secondary attack that Hitler's headquarters had predicted. The genuine invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais. German commanders responded according to this conviction. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend and Panzer Lehr Division, comprising nearly 500 tanks and 40,000 personnel, initially received movement orders toward Normandy. Those same orders were immediately rescinded out of concern for Pas-de-Calais. Hitler, who personally authorized all panzer deployments, refused to release the reserves, absolutely certain that Normandy represented a feint. Beginning at 300 hours on June 6, Garbo commenced his most decisive transmission. After learning of the Normandy landings through his agents, he reported the information to Madrid. Accurate intelligence delivered at precisely the right moment, arriving only after the invasion was already underway. Too late to alter German defensive arrangements, yet perfect for establishing his credibility. Then came his masterwork. Garbo transmitted that his Agent 3 had observed Fusag preparing to depart, confirming that Normandy was indeed a diversion and that the authentic invasion would target Pas-de-Calais once German armor committed to Normandy. German intelligence interpreted Garbo's report as validation of their existing assessment. The 15th Army's war diary recorded, "It is abundantly clear that the enemy is attempting to draw our reserves toward Normandy in order to enable their principal assault at another location." General Hans von Salmuth, commanding the 15th Army, maintained his 18 divisions, approximately 200,000 combat-ready personnel, firmly positioned around Pas-de-Calais. The deception proved extraordinarily resilient. On June 9, 3 days following D-Day, German intelligence continued assessing Normandy as the secondary effort. Ultra-decrypt traffic revealed Hitler stating on June 11 that he anticipated the actual invasion imminently. German command didn't fully accept that Normandy represented the sole invasion target until late July, 7 weeks after D-Day, by which time Allied forces had already broken through the beach defenses. Following D-Day, the Ghost Army embarked for continental Europe to carry out their deception operations further inland. Their work shifted from grand strategic deception toward tactical battlefield illusions, though the underlying methodology stayed consistent. Make adversaries perceive what didn't exist while overlooking what did. Operation Elephant, conducted between July 1st and 4th, 1944 near Normandy, deployed the Ghost Army to impersonate the 2nd Armored Division, while the genuine unit repositioned for Operation Cobra. Employing merely 600 soldiers, they fabricated the appearance of 15,000 troops and hundreds of vehicles. German artillery, duped by the simulated positions, discharged thousands of projectiles at inflatable equipment and empty defensive positions. Battlefield deception became increasingly sophisticated as experience accumulated. During Operation Brittany in August 1944, the Ghost Army mimicked Task Force A, suggesting a thrust from an unexpected direction against Brest. They broadcast radio communications in plain text, seemingly accidentally revealing false assault schedules. Sound trucks replayed bridge-building noises at dummy river crossings. German commanders, responding to these phantom threats, weakened their authentic defensive sectors. Operation Brest, spanning August 20th through 27, 1944, illustrated how far the Ghost Army's craft had progressed. Soldiers portraying Task Force Mason constructed such a convincing facade that German intelligence reported an entire panzer division operating in the area, when actually just a handful of specialists were present. German prisoners captured later described how their commanders had stationed reinforcements based upon these non-existent dangers. Ghost Army techniques continuously refined themselves. Personnel discovered that German observers anticipated specific patterns. Stationary tanks appeared suspicious, so teams repositioned inflatables nightly. They manufactured thermal signatures underneath false vehicles using oil drums filled with burning fuel, defeating German heat-sensing equipment. They even replicated the gradual buildup of military supplies preceding authentic attacks, recognizing that sudden material appearance seemed implausible. The scale of German intelligence miscalculation becomes apparent through examining actual unit movements. The 15th Army, Germany's most formidable French force, containing 18 divisions, remained stationed at Pas-de-Calais during those vital weeks immediately after D-Day. These formations encompassed crack units like the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, and the 116th Panzer Division Windhund. Every division represented roughly 15,000 troops, equipped with hundreds of tanks, artillery systems, and logistical vehicles. Had merely half the 15th Army marched toward Normandy during the invasion's first 7 days, the beachhead likely would have been annihilated. Rather, these thousands of soldiers remained essentially inactive, vigilantly watching for an enemy force that existed solely in German intelligence assessments. Resource distribution revealed German military thinking. At Pas-de-Calais, the Wehrmacht had positioned enormous defensive resources, including 2,000 artillery guns, extensive minefields containing 6 million mines, 100,000 coastal obstacles, plus 500 fortified bunkers and gun emplacements. By contrast, Normandy's actual defenses, though considerable, paled in comparison. The German 7th Army holding the real invasion coastline comprised just 8 divisions, approximately 120,000 soldiers, with inadequate armor availability. This concentration disparity flowed directly from German conviction about Fusag's threat capacity. German maritime and air forces similarly distributed assets incorrectly. The Kriegsmarine stationed its remaining battleships, cruisers, and submarines to intercept invasion fleets destined for Pas-de-Calais. The Luftwaffe, already greatly diminished, concentrated fighter protection over inappropriate coastal regions. Reconnaissance missions that potentially could have exposed the deception got redirected toward monitoring fabricated army positions. Beyond numerical details and strategic movements, the deception's personal impact emerges through individual testimonies. General Blumenthal, serving as Rommel's operations chief, afterward recounted the psychological burden of defending against adversaries simultaneously, everywhere and nowhere. Officers toiled through 18-hour shifts analyzing intelligence regarding Allied units that had no actual existence, devising counter-strategies against invasions destined never to materialize. Major Hans von Luck, commanding a panzer battalion within the 21st Panzer Division, described frustration stemming from successive contradictory orders as German leadership struggled managing both actual and phantom threats. His battalion alone received 4 separate movement instructions throughout June 6th, wasting irreplaceable fuel and time repositioning repeatedly in response to mistaken intelligence assessments. German soldiers manning the Atlantic Wall experienced warfare's psychological dimension completely. Private Klaus Fischer, posted adjacent to Calais, wrote his relatives describing phantom vessels appearing on the horizon, vanishing when examined directly. Actually, Ghost Army operations deploying radar reflectors. Constant false emergencies, the strain of expecting attacks that never materialized, slowly depleted personnel morale and battle readiness. German impacts extended beyond military personnel. French resistance networks documented German forces requisitioning supplies and strengthening positions based upon imaginary menaces, imposing hardship on regional inhabitants. In one instance near Dover, German long-range artillery squandered ammunition bombarding decoy installations, while genuine Allied preparations proceeded without interruption. German comprehension began fracturing through captured officer interrogations. Captain Wilhelm Detmer, taken prisoner in Normandy on June 18, 1944, voiced bewilderment regarding Fusag's inactivity. During questioning, he divulged that German intelligence maintained assessments of at least 25 divisions remaining in southeast England. His interrogators, protecting operational information, neither validated nor contradicted his understanding. While Allied advancement progressed across French territory, discovered German intelligence archives demonstrated how thoroughly the deception succeeded. Documents recovered from 15th Army headquarters contained meticulous maps displaying Fusag unit positions, every single formation completely fictitious. Intelligence reports characterized divisional movements with precision that would have been impressive had those units genuinely existed. The emotional toll on German officers learning about the deception proved severe. Colonel Otto Hoffmann, a prominent intelligence officer captured in August 1944, initially rejected the possibility that Fusag was entirely imaginary. Upon receiving conclusive evidence, including photographic pictures of rubber equipment, he reportedly declared, "Then we are not merely defeated, we are humiliated." Post-war interrogation sessions revealed the complete picture. At Mondorf-les-Bains, Luxembourg, where captive German commanders were detained, American interrogators performed extensive questioning. General Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Armed Forces High Command, conceded on July 23, 1945, that German intelligence had fundamentally missed the deception entirely. "We accepted what we wanted to believe," he acknowledged, "and the enemy presented us precisely what we expected to observe." The Ghost Army's membership included individuals who became prominent figures in American culture after 1945. Bill Blass, who had painted inflatable vehicles, emerged as one of fashion's design innovators, fundamentally reshaping American style and elegance. His talent for generating illusion through fabric perhaps stemmed from crafting military deceptions using canvas and rubber materials. Ellsworth Kelly, employed as a camouflage specialist, helped establish hard-edge abstraction and minimalist movements. His celebrated works, distinguished by striking geometric forms and unmodulated colors, originated from techniques perfected concealing military hardware. "Camouflage involved erasing visibility," he subsequently remarked. "My subsequent career centered on rendering the invisible visible." Art Kane, afterward celebrated for photographing jazz personalities for Esquire magazine in his acclaimed Harlem photograph series, served as a member of the 603rd Engineers. His comprehension of visual framing, manipulating observer attention, derived from constructing military positions, presenting pure illusion. Arthur Singer Jr., who practiced camouflage painting, subsequently illustrated the acclaimed State Bird series for the U.S. Postal Service, his meticulous technique perfected through simulating realistic rubber equipment. These creative professionals contributed remarkable abilities to military operations. They grasped that deception required not precision replication, but meeting anticipations. A fabricated tank didn't require perfection. It merely needed approximating German aerial photo analysts' expectations when viewing from 33,000 feet altitude. This understanding, that perception supersedes reality, shaped their post-war professional trajectories. Maintaining Operation Fortitude's deception network across months required extraordinary logistical coordination. Every element, acoustic, visual, and electromagnetic, required staying synchronized across hundreds of square miles, encompassing dozens of phantom divisions. The London Controlling Section retained comprehensive master files recording each phantom division's supposed coordinates, personnel strength, and operational status. Contemplate the operational requirements. FUSAG supposedly comprised 11 divisions, whether genuinely mispositioned or completely fictional. Each theoretical division included 15,000 servicemen, 2,000 transport units, and numerous support establishments. Ghost Army operations had to replicate every requisite signature. Radio communications suggesting logistical requirements, medical evacuations, court-martial proceedings, and administrative functions. They fashioned a daily routine that German intelligence could observe and accept as genuine. However, nature presented relentless obstacles. When rain came, it transformed their inflatable equipment into dangerous liabilities. Water pooling in creases and folds, accumulating until the structures buckled under the weight. Wind gusts beyond 30 miles per hour could obliterate entire mock motor pools in seconds. The Ghost Army responded by creating specialized crews trained to work through the night, repairing or replacing damaged decoys before reconnaissance planes arrived at first light. They engineered drainage channels running through the inflatable structures, installed guide wire systems to anchor everything firmly, and weighted the bases to prevent equipment from lifting off the ground in violent wind. As the D-Day invasion approached, the coordination between the double agents operating across the channel reached astonishing levels of precision. Every agent's dispatches had to fit together perfectly, each piece of false information reinforcing the larger narrative while remaining internally consistent. MI5's B1A section, the team managing the intricate double-cross system, kept meticulous records documenting everything each agent had ever transmitted. Managing Juan Pujol Garcia's network alone demanded extraordinary attention to detail and logistics. His fictional network sprawled across 27 sub-agents, collectively generating hundreds of reports every single month. Each agent possessed distinct handwriting, distinct personalities, different linguistic habits, and access to different information sources. This level of verisimilitude required constant creative effort. The money side complicated matters even further. MI5 had to oversee German payments flowing into accounts that reflected spending patterns consistent with a vast network operating on paper alone. Testing came when one of Garbo's fictional agents faced arrest. MI5 orchestrated an elaborate theatrical response. They planted announcements in Welsh newspapers about a Spanish national being detained. They fabricated police records. Then they had Garbo inform his German handlers that the agent had been lost. The Germans not only swallowed the deception, but actually congratulated Garbo for managing to protect the rest of his network despite this unfortunate incident. The simple act of believing in forces that never existed induced a kind of mental paralysis within the German command structure. Military leaders had to account for multiple threat vectors, many of them completely imaginary. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt maintained command posts where situation maps displayed Allied strength at twice the genuine numbers. The rigid German military hierarchy amplified the confusion. Hitler demanded personal approval for moving strategic reserves, particularly his precious panzer divisions. Requests for reinforcements originated with field commanders, traveled up to Army Group headquarters, continued to OKW, the Armed Forces High Command, and finally landed on Hitler's desk personally. At every single level, officers weighing battlefield requests relied on intelligence assessments of opposing forces that simply did not exist, creating bureaucratic delays and cascading uncertainty. General Friedrich Dollmann, commanding the 7th Army defending Normandy, embodied the crushing pressure of this situation. He bore responsibility for holding the actual invasion beaches, while German intelligence kept insisting the primary threat was elsewhere entirely. Dollmann confronted an impossible dilemma. When he requested reinforcements, Berlin refused them based on phantom threats identified by FUSAG. On June 28, 1944, Dolman died, officially from a heart attack, though many scholars have concluded he likely took his own life, driven to desperation by circumstances that gave him no viable options. Deception operations never paused, even as Germany's military position deteriorated rapidly. Operation Vistalon, running from mid-March through late March 1945, represented the Ghost Army's most complex tactical operation. Armed with merely 600 personnel, they impersonated the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions, 40,000 troops, positioned at the Rhine River crossing near Düsseldorf. The execution reflected everything learned from nearly 12 months of continuous deception across European theaters. Sound systems broadcast recordings of construction equipment, while actual crossing preparations happened miles away. Inflatable vehicles appeared in openly visible staging areas, deliberately positioned poorly to guarantee German observation posts would spot them. Radio operators generated the kind of disorganized chatter and administrative confusion you'd expect from two massive divisions preparing for a difficult river assault. The deception worked completely, despite Germany's increasingly desperate military circumstances. Wehrmacht units, even in March 1945, shifted positions in response to threats that existed only in intelligence reports. German artillery, rationed to severely limited ammunition supplies, wasted precious shells bombarding inflatable targets. When the actual Rhine crossing commenced where German defenses were thinnest, due to forces being pulled elsewhere to counter fabricated dangers, the operation succeeded with strikingly minimal casualties. For decades following the conflict's end, the true magnitude of Allied deception operations remained classified and inaccessible. Ghost Army personnel were bound by secrecy oaths, prohibited from revealing their service even to family members. This classification served multiple strategic purposes. The emerging Cold War made disclosure of deception capabilities diplomatically risky, and military intelligence agencies feared that fully exposing the operation's sophistication might compromise similar techniques still being employed. Declassification began gradually through the 1970s. J.C. Masterman's The Double Cross System, published in 1972, outlined the broad architecture of the double-agent operations despite British government objections. F.W. Winterbotham's The Ultra Secret, released in 1974, revealed the critical code-breaking component underlying everything. Yet comprehensive declassification of Ghost Army records didn't happen until 1996, more than 50 years after the war concluded. This prolonged secrecy carried real consequences. Many Ghost Army participants disappeared without receiving any formal recognition. Histories of D-Day and subsequent campaigns, written without understanding the deception campaign, presented incomplete and sometimes inaccurate narratives. German officers wrote memoirs and historical accounts unaware they'd been systematically deceived, inadvertently reinforcing misconceptions about Allied capabilities and strength. As classification restrictions finally lifted, remarkable documentation surfaced. The Ghost Army's official post-war history, immediately written but locked away for decades, revealed operational specifics that seemed almost fantastical to military professionals. Photographs demonstrated just how convincingly realistic the inflatable vehicles appeared. Even when examined in high-resolution close-ups, distinguishing them from genuine equipment posed significant challenges. German military documents recovered in 1945, not thoroughly analyzed until much later, confirmed the deception had worked precisely as intended. Intelligence archives containing FUSAG organizational materials displayed detailed command structures for phantom divisions that never drew breath. The National Archives eventually declassified thousands of documents connected to Operation Bodyguard and its subordinate deception campaigns, revealing not simply the breadth of the deception, but its meticulous attention to detail. Veterans donated private collections that added human texture to dry official records. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simonson's personal photographic collection captured Ghost Army soldiers posing beside their rubber creations. These images bore classification stamps and stayed hidden for half a century. Diary entries composed by signal company operators documented the psychological strain of transmitting false radio traffic. understanding that even minimal mistakes might unravel operations affecting millions. Learning they had been completely fooled fundamentally altered German military psychology throughout the post-war period. When the Bundeswehr was established in 1955, its officer training emphasized rigorous intelligence verification and consulting multiple independent sources, lessons extracted painfully from World War II's intelligence catastrophe. German military scholars, granted access to Allied deception records, underwent wrenching re-examinations of their own history. Engagements previously blamed on poor German generalship proved to be deception victories. Officers written off as incompetent were reassessed. They'd actually made sound calculations based on deliberately false information provided to them. General Heinz Guderian later revised his memoirs after discovering the full scope of Allied deception. He wrote something that haunted German military professionals. "We were not defeated simply by material superiority. We were defeated while fighting enemies that existed only in our thoughts, while actual enemies attacked where our defenses lay weakest." This surpasses mere military defeat. It represents true humiliation. The German officer corps, historically proud of its professional competence and intellectual rigor, confronted a devastating realization. Their complete intelligence failure represented a catastrophic institutional embarrassment. Subsequent German military education stressed skepticism toward intelligence assessments, systematic source verification, and awareness that adversaries might systematically manipulate perception. Beyond its immediate strategic consequences, the Ghost Army's impact extended through its veterans' civilian careers. These men rarely discussed their wartime activities until records became publicly available. Then, in their 70s and 80s, they commenced sharing experiences that seemed too incredible for fiction. Reunions during the 1990s brought together aging artists carrying shared history's strangest military secret. The documentary The Ghost Army, released in 2013, brought overdue public acknowledgement. Elderly veterans finally received standing ovations at screenings, their contributions finally recognized publicly. Then, on March 21, 2024, Congress awarded these men the Congressional Gold Medal. 3 aging survivors made the journey: 100-year-old Bernard Bluestein, 99-year-old John Chrisman, and 99-year-old Seymour Nussenbaum, representing the 1,100 men who had performed the impossible using rubber and amplified sound. Following that ceremony, one of the survivors passed away, leaving just 2 known veterans remaining by the end of 2024. Operation Fortitude and the Ghost Army fundamentally transformed how intelligence agencies conceptualize warfare. The understanding that controlling adversary perceptions can accomplish strategic victories without traditional combat became foundational to Cold War strategy and continues shaping contemporary military doctrine. The operation established that information dominance might ultimately outweigh conventional military advantage. The Allies didn't require more tanks than Germany. They simply needed Germany to believe that tanks existed, positioned in places they never reached. Intelligence agencies worldwide examined the operation, extracting principles about deception, counterintelligence, and perception control. The operation also exposed how vulnerable intelligence organizations become to confirmation bias. German intelligence personnel observed what they anticipated seeing, reinterpreted evidence to confirm pre-existing theories, and dismissed contradictory information that conflicted with their assumptions. These cognitive weaknesses remain deeply relevant to modern intelligence challenges. Operation Fortitude's numbers represent perhaps the most successful force multiplication ever achieved militarily. The Ghost Army's 1,105 personnel effectively tied down enormous German resources at Pas-de-Calais. When combined with other deception initiatives, fewer than 3,000 Allied personnel succeeded in redirecting between 400,000 and 500,000 German soldiers throughout the entire campaign. This ratio dwarfed achievements of conventional military operations. The financial calculus proved equally dramatic. The entire deception campaign cost less than a single heavy bomber squadron, yet delivered strategic results exceeding massive bombing campaigns. Each dollar invested in rubber equipment and double-agent operations generated hundreds in German resources squandered defending phantom threats. Time became an additional multiplier. German divisions remained stationed at Pas-de-Calais for 7 weeks following D-Day, 49 days during which these trained formations might have genuinely altered the Normandy beachhead situation. Each successive day permitted additional Allied divisions to land, supplies to accumulate, and breakout operations to be prepared. Technologies created for military deception eventually found civilian applications nobody anticipated. Inflatable structures, refined for military purposes, shaped emergency shelter design and temporary buildings. Acoustic projection methods advanced public address systems, with contemporary concert sound engineering tracing ancestry to Bell Labs innovations developed with Ghost Army personnel. Radio deception techniques contributed to electronic warfare's emergence and early computing. Algorithms for generating false radio traffic influenced primitive random number generation. Materials science advanced substantially through developing weather-resistant inflatable equipment, eventually impacting aircraft escape slides and marine rescue rafts. The Ghost Army validated that artistic sensibility could function as military capability, that creative thinking could be militarized, that imagination might supersede raw firepower. Those veterans eventually returning to civilian pursuits carried distinctive perspectives regarding how perception constructs reality. Their influence extended far beyond individual accomplishments. The recognition that creative professionals could serve national security interests produced increased government funding for arts education. The post-war flourishing of American cultural output included many former Ghost Army members who had learned art possessed genuine transformative power. They recognized perception shapes what becomes real, a realization born from manufacturing military phantoms that ultimately influenced American artistic, design, and cultural expression for generations forward. In contemporary times characterized by information warfare, deepfake technology, and algorithmic social media manipulation, Operation Fortitude's insights feel strikingly contemporary. Military academies internationally study this operation as the definitive case study in strategic deception. Modern military doctrine now incorporates deception as a primary principle rather than treating it as something secondary. Ethical questions persist regarding these operations. Operation Fortitude undoubtedly achieved victory through systematic deception of an enemy, completely legitimate from a wartime perspective. Yet it involved complicated moral considerations. Contemporary military ethicists continue wrestling with determining when such comprehensive deception remains justifiable. As the last Ghost Army veterans approach the end of their lives, their accomplishments demand proper historical accounting. These individuals, averaging 21 years old in 1944, achieved what military theorists had deemed impossible: victory through imagination rather than destruction, triumphs without traditional warfare. Their conquest brought no bloodshed, yet proved completely decisive. German commanders stationed themselves defending against invasions engineered entirely by young American artists wielding imagination. The Ghost Army demonstrated decisively that artistic creativity and inventive thinking could match conventional weaponry in effectiveness. The German officers stationed at Pas-de-Calais during 1944 were decidedly not unintelligent. They represented professional military personnel educated at prestigious academies, experienced through years of actual combat, supported by extensive intelligence infrastructure. Yet rubber tanks, broadcast audio, and simulated radio conversations completely fooled them. Currently, as digital phantoms replace inflatable tanks, as social media campaigns substitute for double-agent networks, as cyber attacks create disruptions exceeding Ghost Army achievements, Operation Fortitude's principles retain urgent contemporary relevance. Technology has transformed, but fundamental principles remain unchanged. In warfare, enemy beliefs determine outcomes more significantly than objective circumstances. The young creative minds who inflated rubber tanks in 1944 intimated that subsequent conflicts might be contested not across geographical terrain, but within consciousness itself, not through weapons but deception, not by military commanders but by artists. German high command never discovered the Allies fielded a phantom army fabricated from rubber until following complete defeat. By that point, consequences had solidified. not merely military catastrophe, but psychological devastation from discovering they'd been battling illusions. The Ghost Army achieved its strangest triumph, making adversaries defeat themselves, conquering by means of artistic expression, winning through imagination. Their achievement continues reverberating across our contemporary moment, where struggling for perception has become struggling for everything. The inflatable tanks have permanently deflated, the recorded acoustic signals have dissipated, the radio broadcasts have terminated, but their accomplishment's resonance endures. Within information warfare, the most potent force might be existence solely within adversary consciousness. The Germans grasped this understanding too late, defending phantom armies while genuine ones sealed their fate. For our contemporary era, the critical question becomes whether we have learned this lesson in time. That within information warfare, reality itself transforms into contested territory, and the most menacing adversaries might be phantoms we ourselves construct in our collective imagination.